So reading a little bit of Age of Revolutions by Zakaria, Farid Zakaria. I'm enjoying it a lot. So this is from page 117, The Mother of All Revolutions. As women participated in the modern economy, they also became more educated, confident, and politically active. Abolitionist societies, self-improvement clubs, and eventually the suffragette movement, all these organizations flourished among the new female urban workforce. In turn, once women achieved some political power, they put themselves at the forefront of broader efforts to protect downtrodden groups of all kinds, enslaved people, child laborers, and underpaid workers. Women's liberation may properly be called history's greatest social revolution, and it was set in motion by industrialization, its greatest economic revolution. Dark satanic mills. Despite all the wondrous accomplishments of the Industrial Revolution, the era was often seen as a fall from grace. An 1804 poem by William Blake lamented how England's green and pleasant land had been marred by those dark satanic mills. 150 years later, J.R.R. Tolkien also tied industrialization to evil. In The Lord of the Rings, the evil wizard Saruman, with his mind of metal and wheels, does not care for growing things except as far as they serve him for the moment, and sets himself up as a budding industrialist. In his greed, he clear-cuts forest and turns the idyllic pre-industrial Shire into a wasteland of ugly row houses, billowing brick chimneys and fouled rivers. Facing with depictions like these, who wouldn't side with nature and the countryside against the encroachment of brutal, mechanistic, soulless industrialization? These depictions reflect a romantic view of pre-modern societies as pure and innocent. The truth, however, is that the world before the Industrial Revolution was no Eden. For the vast majority of commoners, pre-industrial Britain was far closer to hell than paradise. Rural farming near the level of subsistence, that is to say, the constant threat of starvation, was the norm for almost all of history up until the 20th century. Disease, drudgery, and insecurity defined the world until yesterday, to borrow a term from the anthropologist Jared Diamond. The data I discussed earlier makes clear that while the workers of industrial Britain were exploited and poorly treated, they were still doing far better in material terms than their ancestors or even their parents. The simplest proof comes from looking at the choices of ordinary peasants and treating these choices with respect. Tens of millions of farmers all across Europe chose to leave rural poverty to pursue a better life in the cities. Billions in the developing world have in recent decades made the same choice. Yes, there were of course push factors, enclosure displaced families, and the new techniques reduced the demand for farm hands. But it wasn't as if the multitudes flocking to cities were all coerced or deluded. The pull of urban life was strong, and the Industrial Revolution materially benefited the workers who came, even if they did have to contend with unsafe conditions, cramped housing, harsh bosses, and longer working hours. None of this is to trumpet industrialization uncritically, or to take the side of Scrooge against Tiny Tim. The larger historical process was disruptive, wrenching, and traumatic, but over the long term it produced a huge rise in standards of living for working people. It is not the age of money bags and cant, soot, hubbub, and ugliness, the British historian Frederick Harrison wrote of the 19th century. It is the age of great expectation and unwearied striving after better things. Even those who recognize the material progress of industrialization, of industrialism, saw in it the seeds of moral collapse. The poet Oliver Goldsmith, writing The Deserted Village at the dawn of the Industrial Age in 1770, lamented how modernity had depopulated the countryside and killed the humble happiness that had marked the rural way of life. Now, he wrote, wealth accumulates and men decay. Initially, such nostalgia was expressed mostly by conservatives who saw the Industrial Revolution as a source of modern sin, but they were soon joined by ideologues of the left most important among them the architects of communism. Friedrich Engels, Karl Marx's collaborator and funder, inherited his family wealth from industrial textile mills, including one in Manchester. In 1845, after observing and managing such factories, Engels was inspired to write The Condition of the Working Class in England, which predated the Communist Manifesto by 3 years. In many ways, Engels stamped the mid-19th century with the dark view we still have today. It is hard to blame him. The mirror image of the dazzling machinery of the industrial age was the soot-stained faces of the workers whose backbreaking labor built it all. A visceral reaction was understandable, and Engels happened to be writing about a period when technology was booming but real wages remained stubbornly stagnant. Yet this period, that from 1790 to 1840, was not the new normal of industrialization as Engels and others feared. Rather, it was a short-term anomaly in history. So much so that the historian Robert C. Allen dubbed it Engels' pause, a lull before workers' wages and living conditions took off. Various theories have been put forth to explain this interlude. During the early phases of the Industrial Revolution, the jobs were fairly simple, and workers faced steep competition when so many other workers were migrating from the countryside and even children were in the labor pool. Eventually, migration to the city slowed, the government restricted child labor, and the factories became more complicated to operate, all of which boosted workers' bargaining power and helped them obtain higher wages. Another explanation is that it simply took time for all the new technology to be fully harnessed and then for workers to share in the gains. Steam's full potential was unlocked only gradually as it spread through the economy. At first, steam power could increase productivity merely within a given textile factory, since the rest of the economic infrastructure remained the same. Add railroads and steamships to deliver goods to and from the factory, however, and that factory became even more profitable.